Welcome to Vanadium Mysteries. You know, the first time I was ever on my own, out of my parents' house and kind of learning the ways of the world, took place in the city of Philadelphia. And the city of Philadelphia, for anyone who hasn't been there, is a very sort of almost mystical city. It's not as famous and as big as some of the other cities on the eastern seaboard of the U.S., but it has a rich occult and historic history. So everybody knows about the Liberty Bell. But you just walk around the city and it's very old. Boston's kind of the same way. But Philadelphia has this sort of, it has just such a rich history of the Underground Railroad, the Toynbee tiles, which were a whole thing. I should do a whole episode about that. But it was a place where I first learned to kind of be on my own. And where I first sort of discovered who I was, because that's what happens when you're a young person. You get out and you start learning what you're good at. I remember walking the streets, the city seemed huge to me when I first moved there. And I remember walking around and I first came across this weird-looking brownstone building with a really polished gray edifice and looked a really smart-looking fancy building in Center City, Philadelphia. And it was called the Sophistical Society. And it seemed kind of strange. It looked a little bit like a government building or maybe something religious. But theosophy, I didn't know what that was. And it was the early days of the internet, so I certainly just couldn't look it up on my phone. So it took a little bit of figuring out what it was. And I figured out that it was started by a lady called Helena Blavatsky. And discovered one of the most fascinating people that you will just never hear about if you just go to school. And it's a real shame because this lady was incredibly ahead of her time and probably set the intellectual and sort of spiritual direction of the whole human race. And she did it. She was young when she did this. So she was really 16, 17 years old, went out on her own, much younger than I did. I was I was kind of a little on the older side before I really got out of my parents' house and got out on my own and started to live a little dangerously. But she got out when she got married when she was 17 to a guy who was, quite a bit older. And it was really, there are historians differ as to why she did this, but some people think it was just because she wanted to get out and see the world, and there was no way a single young girl could do it. So the only way was to kind of hitch a ride with somebody who was getting out there himself. So she went everywhere around the world. She went to Tibet and India and China and really everywhere. And I can go through the list. But some people even, since she's died and even in the years leading up to her death, some people did sort of cast some aspersions on her claims and her work, saying that maybe she didn't visit all of these places. Well, even if she didn't visit all of them, it's still damn impressive. And she produced, her first real thing where she started to sort of catch fire and develop a following was this book that she wrote called The Secret Doctrine. And this was the first book that the first real famous effort that has stood that we see in history where it's really tried to blend science and spirituality in the same thing. And not to have a distinction between the two and try to put them together into some sort of core philosophy. And she was one of the first people who she thought nothing of race. She thought it was just those kinds of distinctions were ridiculous. And so she had the core tenets to theosophy are really just beautiful things. There's this idea of as above, so below. Helena Blavatsky has a similar quote from her book in 1888, The Secret Doctrine. The universe is worked and guided from within outwards. Here, she's saying that the world is not this alien externality that we have to contend with. We're this ball that's bouncing around this chaotic and just careless machine. It's something that we're manifesting, something that we're unfolding through who we are, through our souls, through our choices, our actions, our character. And it's an idea that it was around before Helena Blavatsky, but in the people that she really created a renaissance of this idea, because it was really only in basically the East and sort of the Indian Buddhist philosophies where this idea existed. But she brought it to America. She brought it around the world. There's another great quote. There is no religion higher than the truth. Helena Blavatsky. I like this one because it says that you don't have to put your reason away to be part of this religion. Your reason is something that you should be proud of as a human being. It's something that you don't need to question, and it's something that you should use to reach a higher spiritual level, and that you don't need to basically put your brain into this sort of like cognitive dissonance, into this non-working state, like many religions around the world as sort of demand that you do. So she always go after the truth, and if this religion's not consistent with the truth, then something's wrong with this religion. I may be reading into that quote a bit, but I believe that's probably consistent with what she's saying. The chief difficulty which prevents men of science from believing in divine, as well as in nature spirits, is their materialism. And this one I like because she's saying that people don't, that a lot of materialism is not an absence of belief. It's a belief. And you are actually, you're going in with a preconceived notion. That is an inherent bias. And there's really, materialism is a religion unto itself. And it blocks you from greater understanding. This one I love. Neither success nor safety is to be found outside self-development. Wow. I love that. So not only is it important for your security and your longevity and your basic success and survival to be developing, getting stronger and better every day, that is actually the measure of success. It's not any end state. It's the continued development. It's great. You know, that you don't have necessarily a set bar for anything ever. It's just to get better. It's just to get better, and it's something that it's a challenge that you have only with yourself. I love that. I think it's something that I try to remember in my own life and live by. I mean, it's if there's anything that about any religion that has helped if there's anything that's helped religion stand up against time, it's been that they've helped their members develop and thrive, and that's why those ideas have hung on. And if the people of a religion don't do well, then they're probably not going to survive, and they're not going to be able to contribute to the religion. So there has to be some sort of personal success that comes as a byproduct of these beliefs for them to persist. I really believe that. I love this quote. Help the poor, but pity the ignorant rich. Wow. Pity the rich. At a time when it was off with their heads, that there was such a class hatred, a class warfare, and a sentiment among the working classes and the lower classes. I hate even those terms. But a real hatred for the rich. But imagine Helena Blavatsky's viewpoint on this. You know, in a way, don't even bother hating them. Pity them for their limited perspective. It's really right on. And it's their limited perspective that hurts the world, us, and them. And here's a quote from somebody I love, philosopher extraordinaire, Alan Watts. He says, he's describing Helena Blavatsky. What a woman, misunderstood, vilified, and abused, and yet what a brilliant, cultured, and deeply learned mind, the very soul of generosity, a woman of direct speech and action, refusing to talk the pious platitudes and nonsense that we chatter under the guise of socially good manners, but offering the truth for anyone who wanted it. In 1920, when I came into the movement, I knew a number of people who had known her well, and on this they were all agreed that after meeting her, nothing was quite ever the same. Now, imagine being somebody. There are people like that out there that meeting them will change your life, and that's amazing. That there are some really special people, and I think she was one of them. And Alan Watts was quite a special person himself, and he's not the only one who had such a thing to say about Helena Blavatsky. Some of the other people of note who were theosophists, who, you know, and very different people of science and of the industrial world and of technology. Thomas Edison was a follower He was a theosophist, a follower of Helena Blavatsky. And he was a hard-nosed, like, I would have thought he would have been a materialist. And it actually shocks, such an inventive mind, somebody that, he stole a lot too, but he invented quite a bit on his own. He probably didn't need to steal and rip off from as many people as he did. But he was certainly a brilliant guy. And it surprised me to learn that he was a follower. And he was a big fan of the Secret Doctrine. Another person, Albert Einstein, kept a copy of the Secret Doctrine at his bedside. That sounds made up, but I've seen that in numerous places. And that doesn't surprise me as much. Because Albert Einstein, what he did with physics is he basically was able to extract information from an invisible landscape and develop a mathematical model that we could use in this dimension. So it was like he was able to see things that you simply couldn't see. He was clear. His work is not science. It's clairvoyance. So it's really next. When people Albert Einstein, you can't tear that hero down. Another one, William James, great philosopher, psychologist, and nitrous oxide aficionado, and brother of Henry, Portrait of a Lady James, the great novelist. He was a big fan. And this doesn't surprise me either, because he was a tripper. He was somebody who was, nitrous oxide, that people discovered that laughing gas back in the day. This is really before the psychedelic revolution. So people didn't really understand at all what was going on. And it's not a psychedelic in the sort of the core sort of understanding of what we think of as a psychedelic. But nevertheless, it's a consciousness-altering compound. And William James was a prominent man. He was a well-respected philosopher and a psychologist and somebody that everybody listened to. And he was doing nitrous oxide all day long. And he was reading Madam Blavatsky. Also, now that we're talking about imbibing substances, Helena Blavatsky was apparently a pot smoker. Apparently used to love to smoke tobacco and reefer together. And philosophize and wax philosophy and science and spirituality with people. So, and she was probably in her early 20s doing this with it was all men during this time. And it was a male-dominated world, and here was this young lady talking that shit, like ruling over the room, commanding the attention of everyone, earning their respect, holding court. Amazing woman. And there's another really interesting story, and this is actually just occurring off the top of my head, but there's another. I'm going to do a podcast about a really interesting woman called Hedy Lamarr, who was an actress and also I don't know how, but somehow learned advanced engineering. She did novel, basically work with radio systems, just in her spare time as being an actress. Absolutely amazing, Hedy Lamarr. And I think, I thought that they had made a reference to that in the movie The Aviator. I forget if that's right. I might be wrong on that. But I'm gonna do an episode on that because there's some really fascinating stuff. She actually had a bunch of patents. She was making movies, and she had no business knowing any of this stuff. She just kind of picked it up. Like, I guess maybe there were some books around when she was growing up or something, and she just picked it up. But to be able to contribute and develop intellectual property and patents from just picking something up and not having your whole life dedicated to it, that's a sizable intellect that I'm sure exceeds my own. So I want to do an episode on Hedy Lamarr. She's another one has sort of just a mystical intellect to me, like Albert Einstein. It's seeing something it's not an iterative, logical chipping away at a problem. It's a quantum leap of understanding, like a supernatural act. And Helena Blavatsky embodies that almost mystical idea of what an intellectual can be, and what thought can do, and how much it can influence a society and influence the direction of art, nations, and just everything. Philosophy, all other philosophers. So, thank you very much. This has been Vanadium Mysteries on Helena Blavatsky. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.